Hi, I'm Shirley, and I want to talk with you a little bit about converting recipes for the probiotic jar. The probiotic jar is a completely anaerobic fermenting vessel, and by design, it just changes the way that food ferments. When oxygen is allowed in your fermenting vessel, it allows yeast and mold to flourish, while lactic acid bacteria has to fight for survival, and we want those to flourish. In an aerobic vessel where you just add water and vegetables, mold is going to win every time. So we have three ways to deal with undesirable microbes in our ferments. And the first method is to create an inhospitable environment by adding whey. Adding whey will lower the pH so the yeasts and molds are inhibited, but it still allows most species of lactic acid bacteria to flourish. It's not ideal though because artificially lowering the pH stops the development of some of the lactic acid bacteria that prefer a higher pH. So basically you've skipped over the proper development of an entire range of desirable microbes. Another problem with adding whey is that you're taking final stage dairy microbes and adding them to a first stage vegetable ferment, and the result is just going to be a yeasty, cheesy kind of flavor. The ecology of the probiotic jar is perfect, and assuming that you're using fresh organic vegetables, you don't need any inoculant for your probiotic jar. So the second method to deal with these undesirable microbes is to increase the salt content. Some crazy recipes out there actually want you to add 1/4 of a cup of salt to 1 quart of water, and this even presents a problem in dissolving that much salt when it's unnaturally high like that. Very high salt content in your ferment is going to sharply limit your lactic acid bacteria activity. So you're going to end up with really a salt-cured food rather than a true lactic acid bacteria ferment. So these first two methods that we talked about of dealing with unwanted microbes are perfectly acceptable, but if you're after a truly healing, optimized probiotic food, you won't get it with either of these methods. The third method that's ideal is eliminating oxygen. The lactic acid bacteria thrive without oxygen, and molds and yeast die without oxygen. So in your probiotic jar, you're not going to need any cultures or whey. You're going to be able to lower the salinity by a great deal. And most vegetable ferments do great at 2%, which would be 20 grams of salt added to 1 liter of water. And we only use and recommend Himalayan pink salt. And I hope you watch our video that explains why we believe that's the best salt to use. Cucumbers are an example of a food that's usually salt cured because of their tendency to mold, but pickles in the probiotic jar do great at 3.5% salinity, and you're going to end up with a truly lacto-fermented pickle. The vegetable fermenting recipes from Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon translate wonderfully into the probiotic jar by simply reducing the salt and leaving out the whey. The one exception to this is recipes that include canned ingredients. Canned foods are lacking in enzymes beneficial to lactic acid bacteria, and they present some special spoilage issues that aren't a factor for fresh foods. And you really do need the whey for safety considerations. For instance, don't try to create lacto-fermented ketchup in the probiotic jar using canned tomatoes without using the whey. Whey it's not necessary for safety when you're using fresh food. Fruits are a little more difficult to work with than vegetables, and the Nourishing Traditions recipes can be used as written by just leaving out the whey. Keep the salt content the same. For recipes that you find elsewhere, just experiment to see how much you need to reduce the salt by. Fruits can be challenging, but generally speaking, if you remember to use 2 teaspoons of salt to 3 to 4 cups of fruit, you're going to have a great successful ferment. Of course, the higher the sugar content, the more salt you're going to need. And you also have to take into consideration other ingredients in the jar that might lend resistance to molds and yeast. If you have a recipe, for example, with 3 cups of fruit and 4 tablespoons of salt, you know that you're going to be able to reduce the salt dramatically and still have fantastic results. So wherever you can find out there, it can be adapted to work wonderfully in the probiotic jar. I hope this really helps you as you find new recipes and you want to try them out in your probiotic jar. Please, if you find a recipe or if you develop a recipe that becomes a favorite of yours, share it with us on our Facebook page. Thank you for watching, and I hope I've helped make converting recipes a piece of cake.